So I had a question for you, Dan. Earlier I was talking about one of the spagyric essences that I'm making, which is essentially a liquid crystal made up of the, uh, the actual body of the plant, which is the salt in the alchemical jargon, and the sulfur would be the soul of the plant or the essential oils, and the mercury being the alcohol extracted from the actual plant fermenting. These get recombined into a highly potent liquid crystal. And when I worked with the rose, I noticed that in a lot of the literature they were talking about decalcification is something that they're using rose hips in a lot of modern studies are talking about benefits for arthritis and stuff, just taking ground up dried rose hips or rose hip tea. So I kind of took it a few steps further and said, well, why not go to the max and make this spagyric essence, and it's a highly refined rose essences, and we know that roses contain, you know, some of the highest vibrational signatures of any of the plants, known throughout millennia, and for, you know, being a symbol of love and passion and regulating female hormones. And but what I had the realization that when you take one drop under your tongue, your face sort of flushes, your pupils dilate, your heart flutters, I'm sure your heart chakra is just blowing wide open, but 3 or 4 minutes after somebody takes it under the tongue, you can notice the smell of roses on the crown of their head. So I had this idea that it's so etheric that it's actually going up and decalcifying the pineal gland as it's traveling up through the top of the head.
Or imploding. Well, I mean, we mentioned that when we talked about this earlier, we mentioned the famous story that it's classic in the biodynamic in the Steiner schools that they teach the children they must very accurately draw precisely the stages of the unpacking of a rose.
Right.
And then they must learn to close their eyes and enact that animation in their inner eye. And, you know, children lose that ability to focus their own inner, if they have too much TV when they're young. By the way, Steiner was right about that. Yeah, Steiner was right about that. At age 7, there's a whole story. Yeah. But anyway, the classic story was, we learned this in Perth, wasn't it, with the Steiner School. There was a wonderful group. The teacher says that the children must not leave the class after they visualize very powerfully this rose, unless the smell of roses fills the room.
Right. Marcel Vogel reminiscent of.
and you see the physics there. There were no roses in the room, but the smell, you know, Callahan proved the physics of olfaction is largely infrared, and we've seen hummingbirds smash themselves on the window when a lady was having bliss in the room, even though the house was sealed. So they can smell through the window, so we know the infrared story is. Anyway, the other part of that I just wanted to mention about the decalcification of the pineal was, you know, and the implosion of the pineal was in the physiology of Kundalini. Well, first, the work we did on the rose oil is at goldenmean.info/biophoton, and you can see we measured a synthetic rose oil versus a real rose oil. Right. We put it in a sensitive capacitive accelerometer, and we multiplied the weak capacitive field by over 1 million. And we got a harmonic series in the case of the real rose oil, which was harmonic inclusive, conjugate, implosive. It was real.
Right.
So the petals of the rose being fractal is actually electrically enacted in the resonance frequency signature, obviously, and that's why it's centripetal. But just to finish the conversation was about the physiology of Kundalini, Aka Bentov, and we have this article at goldenmean.info/Kundalini, which was, he measured the phonon wave of the spinal liquid, the sacrocranial, so to speak, the tidals, and indeed showed that when the sacrocranial pulse arrives at the high brain, the focal between the double cone of the ventricle, so it's called getting horny, but the ventricle horns go from being more liquid to being more crystal because of the coherent phonon arriving, which is the physics of Kundalini. And where does that focus? 2 pine cones kissing noses at the pineal.
Nice.
And the decalcification is because, you know, they said in church, soften the heart of the hardened sinners, or soften the gland. The pineal goes from more crystal to more liquid. So you got the liquids becoming crystal, you know, the standing waves, and the crystal becoming liquid. What happens is the wave propagation velocities equalize, and there's a massive cavity goes critical, implosion, the whole thing. And you feel, if you've had Kundalini, you felt literally crackling in there. And then there's this whole story about the top of your head, you get this bump, and there's this implosion of pressure and this bright light. Well, Electrically, we can go on and on about the physiology of Kundalini, and I recommend the literature, Bentoff and my articles. The point is to have the experience is an electrical pathway, which is a symmetry path, and that is exactly what Paul is describing. To get access to that electrical symmetry path. And if you really relax and close your eyes, and you prepare yourself beforehand, experiences like that can be actually sustainable. It's a beautiful thing. But again, it must be done, in the same way you take anything powerful, with that kind of respect. But I admire Paul's skill, because Paul spent a lifetime at actually developing the hands-on skill to do these extractions.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.